Should you monetize your podcast? Get this question all the time. And today on ProfitCast, we're going to talk about if so, when, and how. This is ProfitCast, and I'm Seth Silvers.
And I'm the real Brian. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. We're so glad you're here. And we are, you know what? This show's fun, but it's also helpful. At least that's the goal, right? So Seth, I'm glad we're doing this together. And yeah, monetization, man, this has been a big deal. It's funny. I've been in podcasting since about 2013. And that's what it was all about back then. It was all about the whole, how do you get more listeners? How do you grow your podcast? And how do you monetize your podcast? That was pretty much what everybody was seeking. They were looking for the answers to that. Some people found it. A lot of people didn't. It felt a lot like kind of network marketing, and it's like the top 3% do really, really well. And the other 97% spend a lot of money trying to figure out how they did it and don't figure it out. It's it's a tough thing to monetize your podcast. And it was a lot easier to do back then when you could start a podcast and people would read, they would hear about it, they would listen to it, they would go crazy. Yeah. And then you'd go to a sponsor and they would say, hey, we'll give you X amount of money because, you've got 500 listeners, you've got 1,000 listeners. It really wasn't that big of a deal. Then it came to the point where sponsors wouldn't even look at you unless you had closer to hundreds of thousands of listeners, or they would give you pretty much peanuts and stuff. And so anyway, it was a big deal back then. It's still a big deal today, but maybe not quite as wise to do. And maybe there's a better way of looking at things. And so that's what we're here talking about today.
I had this funny interaction a couple months ago where I was in Las Vegas and I was at the hotel that I was staying at. And I was like I'd gotten done with work for the day and was getting a drink at the bar or something. And so the bartender was talking to me and she was like, well, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I work in podcasting. And she looked around. She was like, "Guys, everybody's drink is on him. He's a podcaster."
Shows this how they were rich.
Yeah, it was funny, but it's because you see these news articles. You see like, sweet Alex Cooper, this much money, Kelsey Brothers. You see Reagan. Like we see these huge deals, and so then I think people assume, okay, cool, that's how this works. I want to break down some numbers. I didn't put this in our notes, but we should break this down.
I love it. Go for it.
If we just look at the numbers, and this is the conversation that I have, unfortunately, kind of often with people because they're like, it's kind of just necessary to pop the bubble. And it's a hard thing to do. And it often puts me as the bad guy where it's like, hey, like, just, you got to be realistic in this.
Yeah.
But when we look at the numbers, there's 5 million podcasts that have started at some point. I guarantee somebody listening is going to say, no, it's 4.2. No, it's 5.3. It doesn't really
4.689.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of podcasts that have started.
Yeah.
If you look at active podcasts that have published in the last 30 days, there is around, we'll say between 300 and 350,000 podcasts. Yeah, so loosely 7 to 8% of all shows that have started published an episode in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
So out of those shows, the active shows, anytime you see somebody saying we're a 0.1% podcast, apologies if people from Listen Notes is listening to this. I would love to talk with you guys and learn more about how your system works. But there's a lot of places like Listen Notes where they're comparing your current show to all shows of all time. So people say, oh, we have a top 1% podcast, but they're comparing it to all the shows that aren't publishing. We should be comparing your show to the shows that are publishing.
Yeah.
So if you take those active shows, the 300,000, give or take, the top 1% of active shows, an episode does 4,000, around 4,500 downloads in the first 30 days it's released. Or I think it's the first 7 days.
Sure.
And that's data from Buzzsprout. If you're doing 5,000, we'll call it, downloads in the first 7 days. If you're doing a weekly show, you're probably doing at least 20,000 downloads, probably more like 30,000 with back library. So let's say top 1% of podcasters, active podcasters, are doing about 30,000 downloads a month or more.
Okay.
A big advertiser like BetterHelp or I don't even know, ButcherBox or any of those people, them and their agencies are likely not going to pay attention to a show to monetize unless you're doing at least 100,000 downloads a month.
Yeah.
Or 30,000 downloads an episode within a 30-day period. So
so that's lower than I thought, but that's still high.
Yeah, it's kind of between like 1 and 200,000. It seems like that number's kind of going up. So even if you're a top 1% podcast, and I was actually having a conversation with a network the other day. I said, okay, for 100,000 downloads a month, what would you be able to monetize that at? And this is with them taking their 20 or 30% fee. This is with, I think, 4 ad spots. I think a pre-roll, 2 mid-roll, 1 post-roll. And this is saying that on average, they fill 50% of inventory.
Okay.
So they're saying they fill 50% of inventory. And she did the math real quick, and it came out to about $5,000 a month. So you look, you're doing 100,000 downloads a month.
Wow.
In the traditional world, if you monetize that, you're getting about $5,000 a month. I'm not saying that money is insignificant, but it does seem insignificant if you're in the top 0.5 to 1% of your industry. And a lot of this is kind of because I think a lot of this is because the model's broken, like the CPM thing, which you have really good context. So I'd love to hear from you. Like I know you have some thoughts on the CPM model and kind of what that is. And some of our listeners, like, the show is for business owners. So a lot of business owners are coming in. They're like, they're probably thinking about monetization differently, but I think it's helpful to understand the monetization side of things.
I've talked to businesses who actually do look at this model of saying, hey, if we're going to start a podcast, we got to get sponsors and advertisers to underwrite all the costs. And, to basically, we want to make money from the show in addition to increasing our actual business. I've had many conversations like that. Seth, I hate the CPM model. I hate it. In fact, I'm 100% against it.
Can you explain what it is?
Yeah. So first of all, it's the M is the French word cost per meal. So 1,000. So it's a cost per 1,000 listeners. And what they'll do is, and by the way, this is an antiquated
cost per 1,000 downloads, because we're now realizing in podcasting
true.
that a listener is different than a download.
That's true. It's not even listeners anymore. Yeah, it's cost per 1,000 downloads. So it's an antiquated model. I think it's a broken model because this was something that was based in radio all these years ago. When I worked in radio, this was how radio stations made a ridiculous amount of money. And I've talked about this before, but I'll do a quick little, reminder of that. If you look at a radio station tower, it has a geographical reach with how far that tower can broadcast over the airwaves, right? So if you have, let's just say you have 1 million people that live in your city, and your tower can reach all 1 million of those people, but your demographic, let's just say, is 500,000. That's what it is. They'll say, essentially, right? This is kind of the dumbed down version, is they'll say, we have a reach of approximately 500,000 listeners based on our demographic, which means that, well, sure, 500,000 people could be listening to your radio station. They could, right? But likely they're not going to be. And then you've got to look at the fact that then it's going to come down to, what time is this ad airing? Is it during the morning show? It's going to be more money. Is it during, the night or whatever? It's going to be less, right? And then they're going to look at, did those people actually listen? So more than likely, you're not getting 500,000 listeners. More than likely, you're getting like maybe 50% of that if you're lucky, right? Maybe even less. And then they've got to be actually listening, and then they actually have to hear the ad when it airs, which on the radio station, once the ad airs, it goes away. Like, it's gone forever. So it's a very small number of people who actually will hear your ad, assuming that they don't switch stations because they're tired of listening to commercials every 20 minutes. So they're going to charge you based on the 500,000. At least this is what they used to do, right? They used to charge you based on the 500,000 reach. But the reality is you weren't getting that. So when you come to podcasting, now you're actually getting a data of how many downloads are actually happening versus some theoretical potential, right? And then additionally, then you've got a podcast where this ad could live there for a long time. And so new people come in, they can hear the ad. This isn't something that the ad broadcasts and then it goes away. It's there, it's on the internet, unless you're doing dynamic ads and it gets replaced, right? And let's even get that much further. Let's get more granular, is that your podcast is targeting more specific people. Like we talked about, you gotta have the right audience. If your audience is too broad, right? So not only are you having,
so you're saying in theory, the podcast, because it's more specific, should have way higher rates than radio,
conversion.
Because radio, in ad rates too, because in radio, it's like, oh, you have potential reach at this many people. In podcasting, when you buy a certain amount of downloads, you're paying for the amount that actually like download your episode.
Yeah.
It's pretty exact.
Yeah. And if you've got listeners who actually do convert, because you're specifically talking about a business, or something, and these people love what you're doing and they're buying your products and services, or they're the kind of people that, you're actually targeting the right people, versus a radio station is a random hodgepodge of 35 to 55-year-old women. That's very, very general, So your podcast is significantly more specific. An advertiser should be paying exponentially more money for what you're offering and what you're giving them than on a podcast than a radio station any day. So if you're paying a CPM rate, you're getting ripped off. If you're paying, and most CPM rates are like what, $20 to $50 CPM. That's insane. Like,
I would say that I think industry average is 20. I think it's around 24 right now.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
just,
like your pre-rolls are going to be. Your pre-rolls are going to be a little bit more expensive. Your mid-rolls are going to be around that average. Your post-rolls are probably going to be down somewhere near like, I've even heard like as low as like $5 to $12 for a post-roll.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
you're going to have some creators like Joe Rogan. Wow. I think their premium is, I want to say around a $38 CPM. You have a lot of expectations around monetization that are based off of the top, not 1%, the top like 0.1%.
Yeah.
Because if you are doing millions and millions of downloads a month, then the CPM model probably makes a little bit more sense because you have so many downloads that it kind of has to be chunked down into, like, nobody can buy. Most companies can't afford to buy a whole episode. So you need to be able to like split that up. So it makes sense for people actually like Caller Daddy and Joe Rogan and some of these big shows. But then we have businesses or we have individuals coming in. And this is why my kind of like belief with this is the best way to monetize a podcast is to have a service or business on the back end that serves your target audience that are the listeners. And we can talk through several examples of like what that looks like. I also think that it can work well for, like you were saying, brands that want to have sponsors that help to subsidize the cost of producing a show and hiring a producer, an agency, or different things like that. I see examples of that all the time too.
Yeah.
And I think it can work well. The big problem here is if you're thinking about monetizing your show and that's the first thing you're thinking about, I think that you're off on the wrong start. Like that is the wrong thing to be thinking about. So I just sat down with somebody a couple of days ago. He's getting ready to start his show. He's thinking it like he wants to already quit his job and get into podcasting and make money from ads and
drinks around him. Drinks around him.
Drinks around him. Get an audience and get them into retreats and all of this stuff. He has the whole plan. And I just told him, I said, I think if you can just focus only on building an audience and creating consistent content for the next 6 months, then let's talk about monetization. If you don't have an audience, then you can have the most sophisticated monetization strategy in the world and it does not matter. You can't monetize 0 people. But if you have an audience that's coming to you and they're listening to you every single week, there are opportunities to monetize it. So the point of this episode is there are ways to make money from your podcast and to monetize it. But in general, we are kind of putting the flag in the ground and kind of saying for businesses, for branded shows, for kind of B2B shows, if you're wanting to start a show and your goal isn't to make it one of the biggest shows in the world, if you're kind of wanting to be in this niche market where you're solving specific people's problems, then there's probably other ways to make money other than the traditional monetization kind of strategy of like a $25 CPM.
Agreed.
So you can absolutely make money. We'll talk through some of those ways. We'll talk through some examples. Yeah. But you probably shouldn't be trying to make money in the same way that Joe Rogan is making money.
No, absolutely not. In fact, one of the things we love talking about is value driven. If you look at like a value type of a sponsorship, if you're at a point where, again, you offer value, you got to offer value to the sponsor too. That's the other thing too, is that if you're not offering any value just because you have numbers, that's a bad thing. Or if you're bringing on advertisers that you don't believe in or that you really wouldn't want to sell your clients or your listeners and stuff, that's probably not a good idea. So you want to make sure that you're offering them value, you believe in what you're doing, and then you can command a higher value-driven sponsorship rate, which is what I recommend that. Especially most shows are not even close to what Joe Rogan gets on downloads. And so the rest of us are saying, hey,
no show in the world is even close.
But I mean, no show is close. I mean, most shows aren't even close to the ones that are lower than Joe. It's like we're looking at it as if you can create a more value proposition where they say, hey, we'll give you, let's just say this. I'm throwing out a number. Let's just say we'll give you $5,000 for this episode to run an ad and to talk about our business and stuff like that. Forget the CPM model, just do a flat rate, whatever that needs to be. And depending on, again, the value you're offering. So that's one thing. And another thing I was going to share is I had a client a while ago that it's so funny. I love using her as an example because she was an artist and she does all kinds of wonderful art and she sells her art and stuff like that. And also she teaches art. So the whole purpose of her podcast was not to make money with the podcast. It was to go out there and it was to deliver a lot of value to budding artists and say, here's what I'm going to help you with. And she gave it all away. And she also offered classes, and then she sold her art too. Well, her podcast, by doing just that alone, generated so much more money in her business and her teaching and her courses and even her art just by doing the podcast. She didn't make any money directly with the podcast. The podcast helped to generate a significant amount of money for her business and for her art. So it's an indirect way of doing it. But I mean, honestly, to me, that's the far more likely successful way of doing things.
This can get really granular. And so I'll try to not make it too granular, but also you got to understand some details when you are a business trying to wonder what is the best way to make money from my podcast. If you're a business coming into this and you're like, okay, we just need to get new clients. That's great. And you should be thinking about that. But I also think that a lot of businesses, they maybe don't have the business model figured out yet. They're maybe too early for that to be realistic. So this all comes down to like understanding your LTV, your CAC, and some of these fancy business terms, which just that first one under is like, what's the lifetime value of a customer? Like, what is a customer worth to you over the lifetime of their business? Or some people look at it as how much money are you making off of a customer over a year? And then what's your typical customer acquisition cost? How much does it cost to get a customer?
Yeah.
A lot of businesses don't know these numbers. And this is like an important thing to know. You know, once you've been in business for a while and you're actively growing, you're probably going to have a better grasp on these things. But I think you kind of have to be knowledgeable about this stuff to understand, does this make sense? For example, if I decide that I want to launch a podcast, or if I'm looking at ProfitCast as the primary way that I'm bringing in new business, which I'm not, this is a fun thing where we want to educate the market and we want to talk to businesses and help them out. Let's say I was spending 10 hours a week on ProfitCast. So I was spending 25% of my time. I have to know what that time is worth.
Yeah.
And so for me, like very simple numbers, it's like, I don't know, let's say that I make $100,000 a year. And so that, okay, we're spending $25,000 a year on me doing ProfitCast.
Yeah.
If one client, and then again, these are all fictional numbers. If one client coming in is $25,000, then some people would say, okay, cool. We just need to get one client. But that doesn't really take into account how finances actually work, because that would assume that all of that money is profit. You still have to deliver the goods and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
If, most businesses are, let's say after taxes, after everything, there's maybe 20% left over. Okay, cool. So now we need that $25,000 of time that I spent on this acquisition cost going into it. We need that to equal 20% of whatever we do. So you're pretty quickly looking at like, oh, okay, for me to do that, we would need to generate hundreds of thousands of dollars. This came into, I started thinking about this a couple of months ago because I was sitting with one of our clients. They don't run any ads on their shows. Between their two shows, they do about 1.5 million downloads a month, which is huge. That's a lot. Especially with the premium of their brand, they could be making six figures a month probably off of their show. And so he was like, well, American Express would sponsor our show. And the only reason they would sponsor our show is if they know they can get a 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10x return. And he looked at me, he's like, why can't we do that? Like if American Express knows that if they give me $100,000 a month, it turns into 500, then why don't we just not take their 100 and turn it into our own 500? Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
However, it only makes sense if your business model is working.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of like very early businesses, this is where like for a moment, like a lot of coaches, solopreneurs, a lot of early stage businesses where it is not a bad thing, but the reality is you're figuring out your business. You're still figuring out what your product is, how you serve it well, how to price it, how to profit, all of that stuff, where you kind of have to have a profitable business engine or a profitable money model on the back end of your show.
Yeah.
In order to actually have like a real clear connection between, we have this show, we're bringing in these clients, and it's making this amount of money.
Yeah.
So in that sense, this kind of actually like goes backwards and speaks against the thought of like, cool, we're going to start a podcast to get new clients. We hear that all the time, and I think you should do it, but you just have to have the proper expectations. And where it might actually make more sense in the short term, if you're trying to bring in revenue, it might actually make more sense for a lot of like small to medium sized businesses to get sponsors that do align with your audience and not base those prices off of a CPM model, but base them off of value. So it's like, if you're not there yet where you can figure out all the money model stuff on the back end, then maybe you are subsidizing the cost some through sponsorships. I'm talking about this, but my perspective has actually shifted a little bit over the last like 6 months on this, to where I'm actually becoming a little bit more pro sponsorship for business podcasts. Because I think that if we had the proper attribution data, I think that people might realize that they're making less money in customers from their podcasts, but it's really hard to connect all those dots. And so it's valuable from a brand and marketing perspective and all of these kind of more intangible ways. But as far as like directly to customers, it's really hard to know those numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really, really good stuff. I love what you're coming from, because it's given me some thoughts too, as far as, because people do not, a lot of times they do not account for their time. And that's something that I've been, really learning a lot. People are like, I'm not going to spend that kind of money. I'm just going to go do it. And I'm thinking like, well, how much? I mean, okay, as simple as this, our dishwasher is giving out. We got to buy a dishwasher. So then the question is well, how much is installation, and could we do it ourselves? And I'm like, okay, if it's, I think we found out it was going to be like a $90 charge. And I thought, I can't do it. I can't do it for $90, like, I don't even know what I'm doing. So it would take me hours. So you got to, I saved $90, or whatever the case may be,
Totally.
But how much did you save in your time? You didn't. Like, you got screwed in that. So you're right. I think time is a big deal. And so, you look at a podcast of acquiring clients, and I was going back to that example of that client that I had. She put a lot of time into her podcast, but the profit was definitely significantly more than the time that she put it in. So that actually worked out for her, which I thought was really good. But you're right about this, that I don't know if people have considered. You also, Seth, talk about mid-funnel when it comes to podcasting, which is very much what you were talking about here. But explain that a little bit too, and how that relates, because that's also not just about sponsorships or gaining clients either.
If your expectation is that you're going to make money off of your podcast by bringing in clients, then you just have to have a few things in place in order for that to be the primary role of your podcast. One, you probably need to have a fairly high ticket product. Like, you need to be making quite a bit of money. That lifetime value of a customer has to be high. Like, I would say minimum in the tens of thousands. Can be lower. I've seen it work, but most likely, I would say it's going to be hard if it's less than 10,000.
Okay.
That has to be true. And you have to have a really clear and efficient and proven model of turning podcast listeners into leads and turning leads into customers effectively, which again, a lot of people don't. I've produced podcasts before where we get them a bunch of leads and they have no idea how to close them. So those things have to be true. This is where we shift the positioning of a podcast for a business, and it makes way more sense.
Yeah.
We shift the positioning to where the primary goal of the podcast is not to make money through acquiring customers. The primary goal of the podcast is middle of funnel. It's nurturing. It's nurturing your, I would say, your engaged audience, your kind of core audience of people who know who you are, but they haven't hired you. So it's a little less tangible in a sense of directly connecting one-to-one of like listeners to new customers. And we're doing that for some clients. Like, we're saying, here's how many sales calls you get and all of this stuff from the podcast. This problem of monetization and the challenge of it, it brings to the surface, I think, the beauty of a business podcast, which is it is focused as a middle of the funnel nurturing tool. What's the value of every one of your current customers spending an extra 10 hours over the next year listening to you educate and inspire them? Pretty darn high, like pretty immensely high. Like, I don't have time to go and spend an extra 10 hours with all of my clients. But if they all spent an extra 10 hours over the next year consuming content that built the relationship and established more trust with us as a company, that's invaluable, because some of those clients, instead of maybe staying with us for 2 years, maybe they stay with us for 3.
Yeah.
Instead of 2.5, maybe it's for 3.5. Like,
that's true.
That's true. It helps in all of these different ways. So I think the problem of monetization kind of like illuminates why it's good to position a podcast as middle of funnel and look at it as more of a marketing tool than an advertising tool.
People remember how they felt or how they feel more than what they learned or what you said. I was thinking about all of the companies that I've worked with over the years who if they make me feel valued and respected, and they make me feel like they like genuinely too, not just like, hey brother, how you doing? You know, that crap. But I mean, they really made me feel like not only am I a valuable customer, but I am a valuable part of their family. Like they don't only want me, they want me to be a part of something. They want to take care of me, and they want to make sure that my experience is incredible. It's not just about being a customer. Those are the companies where I have more loyalty as a client or a customer than any other company out there. I will never change from those companies. The problem is that's something that's very, and granted, this may seem like business 101, but that is something that's lost today. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've interacted with great companies where I have not felt valued as a person, or cared for. And I feel like a number. I feel like they're caring more about their bottom line than me as a customer. And you know what? I talk. I have a podcast. I have multiple podcasts. I talk about these businesses, and I tell everybody my experience. How many other people are walking away from that company? So nurturing I'm not kidding, man. Nurturing's got to be one of the most important things that a business can and should do. And a lot of businesses have forgotten that art. At least that's what I've experienced and seen recently. So this is why I think a podcast is so important too. And I'm glad you brought up the middle of the funnel, the nurturing thing. I've had a lot of conversations with clients and businesses over the years. Got to make money with a podcast. And I go, but look at what you're doing. Look at this value that you're giving right now. You're nurturing your customers and clients. You're becoming a thought leader in your industry. You didn't expect that, did you? Well, but it's not making me any money directly. But do you know the value that you're giving right now, and that you're actually getting back that you can't even see? Like, it's not about the bottom line right this second. You're building something that's going to explode if you keep going. And I love that. So that's been my experience with a lot of great people.
It's true. And I think it all kind of comes back to what we were saying at the beginning, which is one of the best ways to monetize a podcast for a business is to have a business that serves them well in the back end. We talked about that some in like there's some nuance to it. I don't want you to start and be like, okay, cool, we're going to get a ton of clients, or all these clients are going to make this make sense. Like you want to think through these things strategically. But I do want to kind of come back to our initial question, which is, should you monetize your podcast? And I want to give a couple examples of people that are doing this really well. You mentioned the phrase like value-based sponsorship. I think that's what this should be for businesses and for small podcasts. Like, just as an encouragement to our listeners, you set the rules for your podcast.
Yeah.
You don't have to take an advertising deal you don't want. You don't have to turn on Spotify's ad network and get a $15 CPM or I think it's $12.50 because it splits the $25. Like,
oh my gosh,
you don't have to do that. And I would say if you're doing only a few hundred or a few thousand downloads a month, it's not worth doing. One of our shows is in a very niche market. Mm-hmm. They only have a few hundred listeners each month, but those listeners are executives and decision makers in their market. They easily sell, like, I would say in the $3,000 to $7,000 a month in advertising deals to companies in their industry, because they know that it makes sense for the industry. So I don't know what the CPM, cost per thousand, on that is. Another show,
it doesn't matter.
Work with this
That's
show.
a great value example right there. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so they cover their costs easily, and they make a little bit more money.
That's fantastic.
Another show that we've talked with, they are a very niche show. They're in the human resources space. And they do a couple thousand downloads a month, less than 5,000. And they do over $30,000 a month in sponsorship.
Wow.
The reason they, the reason they
love that.
The way that they can do that is because they do a really good job of integrating sponsors.
Yeah.
And they also know the industry, and they're not going broad at all. They're very specific towards like their industry and the impact that they're making. And then another show that we're talking with right now, like they were with another ad network. This show does about 50,000 downloads a month. So top 1% show. The first like 3 minutes of their episode they're all programmatic ads. So it's just like kind of like run of the mill ads that are being inserted at the beginning. And so I asked the host, I was like, are you like making good money from this? Because if you're not, then it's not worth the first 3 minutes of your show being ads and you losing most of your audience. She's like, no, I'm making like a few $100s a month.
Ooh.
So we actually went out and we found a sponsor for them. We don't traditionally do this, so don't call me asking to go find you sponsors. But we talked with somebody because we knew a company that would be a really good fit. And so we initially said, hey, there's this company, they want to sponsor your show for $10,000 a month. Wow. And they will be the only sponsor on the show.
Yeah.
So for that month. So it's kind of like buying all of the spots for a month, and it's more of a partnership. This also changes to where now you're not having to sell 4 ads per show. You're selling 12 spots per month, per year. So you're kind of looking like, once you look at it from a monthly, annual, or a monthly value basis, it really changes. So these are just some creative ways that we're seeing podcasters monetize and drive traffic to their business. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can do both, and do it more based on the value of saying, hey, for our show, yes, you can sponsor, but it's going to be $1,000 an episode. And here's why that's valuable, because we speak to this audience. We have, this specific group of people. Or maybe you're saying, okay, it's $3,000 for the month, and then the next month is $3,500, and you can buy, you can get flexible with it. So I want to kind of end this episode by talking about how there are examples of people doing it in creative ways. It's not a one size fits all thing, but I do think that for most of the people that are listening to this, of like brands and businesses and podcasting, looking at the traditional podcasting industry and model and monetization model, it's not really for this segment of the market that we're talking to.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that, because I've seen other successful examples as well, but the ones you're sharing are just fantastic. And they're right now, and it's showing that people are having, first of all, they're doing the work to get out there and talk to the right companies and say, you're the right company for us. We're the right audience for you. Here's the value we bring to you. Here's the price we have, and I think that's a fantastic way. So I love that. I love the fact that they're seeking value. I think the more podcasts that do this, you're going to see more profit. You might even have a better chance at getting sponsors, even if you have, 100, like you mentioned that one show. Maybe you've got 100 and 200 listeners per episode. That's it, But because of the target of what you're doing, you could get a sponsorship that actually drives money for you. So I think the more that do this, the more podcasts that go after this, maybe it'll change a little bit of the paradigm too of the whole CPM thing. And also it'll get more podcasts that are actually monetizing in a more effective way than they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And so I love these examples, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about it. Went a little bit longer than I expected, but the conversation was good. And I think even I learned, I don't know if you learned anything, but I sure did. So I appreciate that.
I learned that I feel more passionate about this than I realized.
I think I did too.
It's like, this is actually fun to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think once we get into it, it's like, there's so many different ways that it can actually make sense. And I think the nuance of like, people not just believing like, okay, cool, I'm going to start a podcast and get a bunch of clients, and that's how we're monetizing. Like it's just more nuanced than that. And it's fun to see it work for businesses. And we see that all the time.
And you said it's not a one size fits all solution. And so really you got to look at where you're at, what you're doing. Really it is a lot. I find more and more and more, because none of us are the same. We all have to customize a lot of things, and it's okay to do that. So what worked for someone else is not going to work for you, and that's okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for watching. Really, this has been fun, and we'd love to talk with you more. If you have any questions, you can go to rockmypodcast.com for the podcast. You can go to storyon.co for Seth's company. And even though Seth and I are doing some work, I also have realbrianmedia.com as well. But love to hear from you. But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And thanks for being a part of this. And we will talk to you soon. We've got a lot more coming.
Peace.